There are many types of harmful speech, and all types of harmful speech requires a societal response. But only incitement to violence requires the involvement of the state. Only incitement to violence should be criminalized. Words can and often do harm others, and a society is usually justified in restricting speech that causes harm. But the type and extent of restrictions would depend on the type and extent of the harm associated with the speech. So harmful speech needs to be broken down into the different layers. The general domain of harmful speech would include speech that causes any type of harm, and that includes speech that defames, stereotypes, and insults others. For example, speech that falsely accuses someone of a crime, or speech that insults a person's faith. Within this general domain of harmful speech, we could identify a particularly harmful type of speech, and that's hate speech. Speech that conveys hatred towards a particular person or group on the basis of an identity falls into this category. For example, calling an entire religious community disgusting is clearly hate speech. Next, within the domain of hate speech, we can find a particularly harmful form of speech, and that's incitement. Incitement involves not just conveying hatred, but also compelling others to act in a hateful manner. For example, encouraging others to refrain from selling goods to the LGBTQI plus community amounts to incitement. The worst kind of harmful speech comes next, and that's incitement to violence. For example, in Rwanda, when a particular political group called on its followers to attack and kill an entire ethnic group, the outcome was genocide. So incitement to violence can result in terrible consequences. Now that we understand the various layers of harmful speech, we can turn to the problem of deciding what the appropriate response might be. We can visualize the various types of responses to harmful speech along a spectrum. At the one end of the spectrum, when the harm is not particularly intense, the person who engages in the harmful speech, such as insulting someone's faith, can face appropriate consequences such as criticism and rebuke by society. Next, there can be civil sanctions of some kind, dismissals from employment, the revocation of a broadcaster's license, when the speech is hateful or involves incitement of some kind. But at the other end of the spectrum, there can be criminal sanctions such as fines or imprisonment when the harmful speech involves incitement to violence. So there is a limited role for the state to play in how society curbs harmful speech. It plays a role when incitement to violence takes place. So why should the state's role be confined to incitement to violence? Let's look at this question. The first reason concerns free speech. If people start to second guess their right to voice their criticisms because they're worried or afraid that the state might punish them, then the freedom of expression in a society will be seriously damaged. We would not have anyone to hold the state to account. The second reason relates to the state's own track record. In Sri Lanka, for example, we've seen state inaction when it comes to punishing incitement to violence, but state excess when it comes to punishing criticism of the state. And this track record has led to a breakdown in public trust in the state. So in that context, it actually makes sense to limit the role of the state when it comes to regulating harmful speech and confine it to instances of incitement to violence. So there are many types of harmful speech, and all types of harmful speech requires a societal response. But only incitement to violence requires the involvement of the state. Only incitement to violence should be criminalized.